Surrendering our timeline. Many of our struggles with surrender stem from our desire to control, not just outcomes, but timing. We want good things to happen, but we want them to happen according to our schedule. This creates frustration when God's timing doesn't align with our expectations, or when we have to wait longer than we think we should for breakthrough, healing, or answered prayer. But learning to surrender our timeline means trusting that God's timing is perfect, even when it doesn't make sense from our limited perspective. This requires developing an eternal perspective that values character growth, deeper relationship with God, and His broader purposes over our immediate comfort or desires. The process of waiting and trusting God's timing often produces patience, perseverance, and deepened faith that couldn't be developed any other way. When we fight against God's timing, we miss these opportunities for growth and create unnecessary suffering for ourselves. Elizabeth experienced this when she desperately wanted to get married but remained single, well into her 30s despite her prayers and efforts to meet someone. Her initial response was frustration and questioning whether God cared about her desires. However, as she learned to surrender her timeline to God, she used the season of singleness for personal growth, ministry opportunities, and deepening her relationship with God in ways that wouldn't have been possible otherwise. When she did eventually meet her husband, she recognized that both she and he had needed those years of preparation to be ready for the relationship God had planned for them. Chapter 12. The fruit of authentic surrender. Supernatural peace in natural circumstances. Of the most remarkable fruits of authentic surrender is the development of what can only be described as supernatural peace. This isn't the temporary calm that comes from favorable circumstances, but a deep settledness that remains stable even in the midst of chaos, uncertainty, or genuine difficulty. This peace doesn't mean the absence of all emotional response to challenging situations. We may still feel sad about losses, concerned about difficult circumstances, or disappointed when things don't go as hoped. However, underneath these natural, emotional responses is an unshakable foundation of trust that keeps us from being overwhelmed or consumed by anxiety. People who develop this kind of peace often become sources of calm and stability for others around them. In crisis situations, they're the ones who can think clearly, provide comfort, and maintain hope because they're not being driven by fear or the desperate need to control outcomes. This supernatural peace also affects our decision-making processes. Instead of making choices from a place of anxiety, desperation, or the need to force solutions, we can approach decisions with clarity and wisdom, trusting that God will guide us and work through whatever choices we make. Genuine joy that doesn't depend on circumstances. Beautiful fruit of surrender is the emergence of genuine joy that exists independently of external circumstances. This isn't the shallow happiness that comes and goes based on what's happening around us, but a deep contentment and celebration of life that remains accessible even during difficult seasons. This joy springs from the security of knowing we are deeply loved by God, that our ultimate well-being is secure in His care, and that He is working all things together for our good. When these truths become more real to us than our temporary circumstances, we can experience joy even when life is challenging. This doesn't mean becoming unrealistic or pretending that difficult things aren't actually difficult. Rather, it means having access to a source of joy that transcends immediate circumstances and provides strength and perspective during hard times. Many people report that this joy feels lighter and more spontaneous than the happiness they previously experienced, because it's not dependent on maintaining favorable circumstances. There's a freedom and playfulness that emerges when we're not constantly protecting our fragile sources of happiness. Love that flows naturally. Authentic surrender removes many of the barriers that prevent us from loving others well. When we're not constantly trying to get our needs met through other people or protecting ourselves from disappointment, we have much more capacity to genuinely care for others. This love isn't forced or manufactured through effort and willpower. Instead, it flows naturally from the security and fulfillment we find in our relationship with God. When our deepest needs are met in Him, we can love others freely without demanding that they complete us or make us happy. This kind of love is particularly transformative in close relationships. Spouses experience greater intimacy when neither partner is trying to change or control the other. Parents can guide their children with wisdom and patience rather than anxiety and manipulation. Friendships become deeper and more satisfying when we're not constantly worried about whether we're getting as much as we're giving. The love that flows from surrender is also more inclusive and generous. When we're secure in God's love for us, we're less threatened by differences in others and more able to extend grace, patience, and kindness even to difficult people. Wisdom beyond our years or experience. Perhaps one of the most surprising fruits of authentic surrender is the development of wisdom that seems to exceed our natural knowledge or experience. When we're truly surrendered to God, we become more sensitive to His guidance and more aligned with His perspective on situations. This wisdom shows up in various ways: knowing what to say in difficult conversations, having insight into complex situations, understanding how to respond to challenging people, or recognizing opportunities that others might miss. It's not that we become supernatural fortune tellers, but rather that our judgment becomes more aligned with God's values and purposes. This wisdom also includes knowing when not to act or speak. Many problems are made worse by our attempts to fix them prematurely or inappropriately. Surrendered people often develop a sense of timing and discernment that helps them know when to wait, when to speak up, and when to step back. Friends and family members often seek out people who demonstrate this kind of wisdom because they sense that there's something different about their perspective and approach to life. This creates natural opportunities to share about the source of this wisdom and to point others toward the peace and joy that come from surrender. Conclusion. The invitation to surrender. You are right. Now, as we reach the end of our exploration of authentic surrender, it's important to acknowledge that wherever you are in your spiritual journey is exactly where God meets you. You don't need to have everything figured out, achieve a certain level of spiritual maturity, or overcome all your struggles with control before you can begin to experience the joy and peace that come from surrender. God's invitation to surrender is extended with full knowledge of your fears, doubts, past disappointments, and current struggles. He doesn't wait for you to become perfect before offering His love and acceptance. In fact, it's often in our moments of greatest need and vulnerability that we're most open to experiencing the relief and freedom that surrender brings. If you're reading this and feeling overwhelmed by the gap between where you are and where you think you should be, take heart. Every person who has learned to live in authentic surrender started exactly where you are. Now's someone who needed to learn how to trust God more deeply. The beautiful truth is that God is more interested in your willingness than your ability. He can work with a heart that's open but uncertain much more easily than one that's closed and self-sufficient. Your very desire to experience deeper happiness with God is evidence that His Spirit is already drawing you toward the life He wants to give you. The choice before youth. Missing step 2, being truly happy with God. Authentic surrenders, both a one-time decision and a daily choice. It's a decision in the sense that you can choose right now to release your grip on control and trust God with your life. It's a daily choice in the sense that this posture of trust needs to be renewed regularly as you face new challenges and opportunities. You don't need to wait for a perfect moment, a crisis that forces your hand, or a dramatic spiritual experience to begin this journey. You can start right where you are, with whatever situation is currently causing you stress or anxiety, by simply saying, God, I trust you with this. I release my need to control the outcome and ask for your peace and guidance. This choice will likely feel unfamiliar and perhaps even scary at first. That's completely normal. You're essentially rewiring patterns of thinking and responding that may have been in place for years or decades. Be patient with yourself as you learn new ways of relating to God and responding to life's challenges. ****. Remember that surrender isn't a destination you arrive at once and never have to think about again. It's more like a muscle that grows stronger with exercise or a skill that improves with practice. Each time you choose trust over control, peace over anxiety, or surrender over striving, you're building spiritual strength that will serve you well in future situations. The promise that awaits. The promise of authentic surrender isn't that life will become easy or that you'll never face difficulties again. The promise is that you'll never face anything alone, and that even the most challenging circumstances can become opportunities for experiencing God's presence, growth, and purpose. When you learn to live in authentic surrender, you join the ranks of countless believers throughout history who have discovered that God's ways truly are higher and better than our ways. You become part of a legacy of people who have found that losing their life in God's purposes actually results in finding life more abundant than they ever imagined possible. The happiness that comes from authentic surrender isn't the shallow, temporary pleasure that our culture often promises. It's a deep, abiding joy that can coexist with sorrow, a profound peace that remains stable in uncertainty, and a security that doesn't fluctuate based on external circumstances. This is the happiness that your heart has been searching for all along, not the happiness that comes from getting everything you want when you want it, but the happiness that comes from knowing you are perfectly loved and held by someone who wants your ultimate good even more than you do. Your next step doesn't need to be dramatic or complicated. It can be as simple as taking a deep breath and saying, God, I'm ready to trust you more deeply. Show me what surrender looks like in my life today. Perhaps there's a specific situation that's been causing you anxiety or stress. Instead of spending more energy trying to control or fix it, consider placing it consciously into God's hands. This doesn't mean becoming passive or irresponsible, but rather doing what you can do while trusting God with what you cannot control. Or maybe there's a relationship that's been a source of frustration because the other person isn't responding the way you think they should. Consider what it would look like to love that person freely while releasing your expectations about how they should change. You might begin by incorporating a simple surrender prayer into your daily routine, taking just a few minutes each morning to consciously place your day, your plans, and your concerns into God's care. Whatever your next step, remember that you're not taking it alone. God's Spirit is ready to meet you, guide you, and provide everything you need for the journey ahead. The same love that invited you to surrender will sustain you as you learn what it means to live in authentic trust. The missing step to being truly happy with God is authentic surrender, and that step is available to you right now. Your heart's deepest longings, your desire for peace and joy, and your search for meaning and purpose all find their fulfillment in learning to rest in God's perfect love and trust, His perfect wisdom. The invitation is extended. The path is open. The only question remaining is, will you take that first step toward the life of surrender that God is offering you today? Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight. Proverbs 3:2-5-6. The journey of authentic surrender begins with a single step of trust, but it leads to a lifetime of discovering just how good and faithful our God truly is. May you find in surrender not the loss of freedom, but the discovery of what true freedom actually means, the freedom to be fully loved, completely accepted, and perfectly secure in the hands of the one who created you for joy.